Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Extreme User Research for Startups. My name is Colin Mahan. I'm a director of programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you will see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to know where you're coming in from. Let's see. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please let us know in the Q&A box throughout the presentation if you have any questions. We'll try to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft, DPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We're humbled and grateful for their contributions. Now, before we get started, I'm going to launch a quick poll just to let us know, how are you feeling about your business today? Are you optimistic, in survival mode, feeling a little anxiety? Let us know. We use this to guide the wellness resources that we provide for the entrepreneurs in our community. So thank you for letting us know how you're doing today. I'm gonna let this roll for another moment or so. All righty. Well, I'm gonna end this poll, share those results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but followed closely by a little anxiety and survival mode. So hopefully our presentation today will help alleviate some of those sentiments. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest today. Vincent Chang is a head of culture at Smart News, and he's a Center Advisory Board member. Vincent, welcome.
Thanks, Colin. Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello.
All right,
Thanks
Vincent,
for that.
well,
Thanks for an amazing welcome. I love that in the poll, everybody is fearless, apparently. So today we'll talk a little bit about overcoming some of those fears as we, as entrepreneurs, get to know our audiences. That will be kind of the theme today. I would love to actually begin by getting to know some of you. So in the chat, please let me know, what are you working on? Are you building an app for consumers? Are you doing an enterprise play? Do you have a food business, a nonprofit, something in the arts? Let us know, let me know, and then maybe I can tailor some of the examples for you. So chat away. Awesome. My name, again, is Vincent Chang. Right now, I head up internal communications at Smart News, and previously held many, many roles, including head of culture at Smart News, where we would do many projects internally to boost morale and communicate our mission to all of our employees, and externally to do very interesting things like the field research that we'll be sharing with you today. Smart News is a very popular news discovery app that's used by tens of millions of people, and it's the #1 news app in Japan, where it was founded, and is extremely popular in the United States. And I've been there, I believe I was employee #4 in the US, so I got to witness the entire journey from launching as a complete unknown as a Japanese startup in the US in 2014 to becoming one of the leading news apps in the country. Great, I see in the chat we have people working on blockchain, consumer mobile apps, hardware products, healthcare, B2B, complete gamut, more B2B, web designers and artists. Excellent. So we'll try to cover more generalized UX and research examples that are applicable to everybody. Obviously, I'm talking from a B2C consumer perspective in developing apps that will really hit the consumer mobile market. But I'll also be talking about my former career in Hollywood in movies, to working in the enterprise space with Dassault Systems, and also the work that we do at the Entrepreneurial Center, working with entrepreneurs like you, working on a wide gamut of everything. And as Colin said, there'll be Q&A at the end, but feel free to write questions or comments even in the middle, and Colin can interrupt me. If you have a very specific question on something that's very timely about something that I'm presenting, please give me your feedback or your questions. Love to hear what you're thinking about. So with that, I would like to actually share some fun stuff on my screen. Let me get the right tab here. And we begin with a movie trailer. This is a movie I worked on more than 15 years ago.
You understand the meaning of the word foreboding? As in badness is happening right now.
Out the country, but the blueberry still connect. So for one last time, I need y'all to fall.
Smooth. That's how we do it.
All right, hopefully the sound came through okay on that. Miami Vice was my first foray working in Hollywood for director Michael Mann, and as also an assistant for Colin Farrell, Jamie Foxx, Gong Li, and many other interesting actors. Back then, I was a research assistant, and the director, Michael Mann, is known for his realism in movies. And he is so meticulous. We would spend over a year just doing research, interviewing DEA agents, undercover cops. And during the course of that research, I learned a lot of the skills that I would later apply in the tech industry for my clients when I was running a PR agency to my work at Smart News. What I learned was really interesting. First, it's always worthwhile to interview subject matter experts, right? So if you want to make a movie about undercover cops, who better to talk to than a real undercover cop? If you want to learn about drug smuggling in South America, who better to talk to than a real drug lord? And we would do so by calling up the DEA and getting some moles and informants who wanted to help out movies, real ex-former cons to help inform us. And this helped during the writing process, writing the script. But that wouldn't help us for actually making a movie because the actors also need to gain that experience. And the best way to gain that experience is through field research. So we would send Colin Farrell to the worst parts of Compton and East LA, dressed as an undercover cop. And he would go with the cops on their day-to-day, go through the neighborhoods, meet their contacts, and he was scared poopless. We had audio recordings of everybody he talked to. We would review that with them. And it really led itself to increasing and heightening that tension, that drama, because he remembers how afraid he actually was in real life. And we also learned a lot by, one day, Michael Mann called us and said, hey, I want to take the actors on a real drug run, on a simulated drug run, but on a real speedboat from the Dominican to Miami. And I want you to get a real drug dealer expert to teach us how to do that. Let's smuggle barrels of sugar, and we did so. And that was also terrifying, not just for the crew, but for the staff like me who had to arrange such an ordeal. And there is something always to be gained by going out in the field and having those real experiences, because when it comes to actually performing, whether that's on camera or whether you're a founder trying to relate these personal experiences, if you have no personal experiences, it becomes a lot harder to sell that story. And we'll talk more about that at the end. But fundamentally, storytelling is essential to who we are. I'm a super nerd. I have Lord of the Rings here. But when you study mythology, when you study narrative construction, they usually boil down to just a handful of repeated stories and myths over many, many centuries of civilization. But at the core of those stories are retellings based on personal experiences. Whether it's fiction or whether it's fact, is not as relevant as what were your personal experiences that led to the development of those stories. So here I am in front of you, and because I lived through these things, I can tell you a very compelling and interesting story of what it's like to learn about money laundering and drug dealing in real life. And so the more real stories you have, the more compelling you'll be, not just with your customers, but with your partners, with your investors, and all of the people that you need to pitch and win over. So I guess that would be our first lesson, which is go out into the field, not just for your intellectual research, but to gain these stories that you can use. If there's any questions, feel free to leave something in chat. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to share with you our main topic, which is some of the actual field research I did with Smart News. So during the 2016 elections, I'm sure everybody remembers those, or some of us are trying to forget, and just the insane amount of political turmoil we went through, especially as a news app, we are right in the center of that. Fake news, distrust in media, social media leading to things like the filter bubble. These are all serious issues, but even more serious for us as a Japanese company was coming to America and not being native to all of that, right? So we have co-founders that were highly successful in Japan, engineers that are world-class, an amazing machine learning algorithm that can help sort through the news to bring you just the quality news and even articles that are not yet trending, right? To get you out of that filter bubble to see new and interesting things. Really great technology. But even though we had that technology, we did not have the experience in this market. So to enter a new market, we really wanted to learn more about America. And to their credit, our co-founders, again, who are Japanese, were very rare. I've never heard of other Japanese founders that spent time trying to study all of America, not just, typically we fall into the mistake of doing user research in California and New York. But here they really wanted to meet Middle America because they wanted to build a news app for everybody. So in chat, how many of you have done user research, and how do you do it? Do you use a remote agency? Do you use SurveyMonkey or userresearch.com? There's a lot of great online services these days. The problem of which it's usually somewhat of a self-selecting audience. And also you are missing a lot of the environmental cues. So you can interview just like right now in the webinar, you can see my face, pretend I'm a user and you're interviewing me. You can see me, you can see what I'm clicking. That's great, I think, for UI refinement. It's less great for launching new products and new markets when you're kind of in the earlier stages, because you're still trying to lock down the product market fit. If you already have the product market fit, you can use these larger, more online-based survey tools to really hone in and refine every single button, every single price point, even the language on your website, all of those things. But the first thing you need to do is find the product market fit. And you also need to develop the story of your product. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So in 2016, we decided to take our co-founders on a mega road trip across the United States. And what began as a small project ended up lasting about 2 years, even past the elections. Our first road trip was more of a general survey of the South and the middle of the country. And that's our mascot, Chiku-kun, which you can see behind me here. It means Mr. Earth or Mr. Planet. So we brought him along for the ride. I believe this is a long drive through Colorado. And we took them to their very first Walmart, and we immediately got rid of all their backpacks and all their tech clothes and their really cool Tokyo fashion. And instead, we bought all new clothes and new duffel bags from Walmart. We called it our Midwest cosplay to blend in. We had our first chicken and waffles. We went to our competitors / partners at CNN. We really wanted to learn what the most successful news apps in America were doing, and also the history of news broadcast. We went to Miami, and we got to see the culture dancing. And this would be very interesting because a few months later, during the elections, we would suddenly see this culture turn into one of the hotbeds in Florida for the elections. We went to Mardi Gras and realized that even as an American myself, I was born in San Francisco, I had no idea Mardi Gras was basically every single day in the spring. So it wasn't just Mardi Gras, it was Mardi Gras every single day. We stayed in a cotton field. This was a real eye-opener for me, in a little tin shack out in Tennessee. We went to where Martin Luther King was shot. We stayed in a somewhat out-of-date teepee motel, I suppose, built in the 1950s in Texas. Probably not politically correct these days. Oddly enough, next to this place, there was a weird handmade sign that said Computer Museum. So being nerds, we walked in there, and it turned out one of the first astronauts who also helped on the Apollo missions had his own personal museum. And this is a computer chip. Actually, it was a memory module. And this memory module, I believe, had 1K of memory. And it was hand sewn with metallic wires by master seamstresses. This was before the invention of silicon chips. We went to NASA Mission Control. We went to the Westminster Dog Show. We went to the site of the Oklahoma City bombing, where I actually had the best ramen I've ever had in the US. We learned in Texas that this, what they called a Mexican salad, apparently had a secret giant burrito buried within it. And it was probably the healthiest thing we ate on this entire trip. We saw our first buffalo. And then we came to this, a photo that perhaps will never appear on my social media. We started to go to political rallies. We went to rallies on all sides, Hillary rallies and Trump rallies. And at each rally, we did our cosplay. We tried to blend in. We wanted to make people feel comfortable as we talked to them. We wanted to do our user testing at those events. We wanted to show them our news app, and we wanted to get their opinions right when we're standing there, right when we're standing in a sea of people in front of Trump. We went to Colorado. We went to the Olympic Training Center. But mostly we saw this, a lot of nothing. And it was during these hours and hours and hours on the road that a lot of deep reflection would occur. And a lot of interesting conversations would happen with our founders. We would talk about the trends we found. One of the trends we found was, well, even though there's millions and millions of people reading the news, nobody likes it. When we asked over 100 people, do you like the news? Do you read the news? Most people said, no, I hate it. I try to avoid it as much as possible. It took us many days on the road before we realized the answer to our follow-up question would be the most illuminating. Well, we said, well, if you don't like the news, why? And they said, because it's war, it's the economy, it's negative stuff, it's pain, it's suffering, it's shootings, it's racism. And of course, we couldn't argue against that. It's real. And as an American myself, I feel that every day. But then we would ask them, what do you read? And they would say, I follow my favorite sports team. Go Giants, go Bears. And they would say that they follow fashion and beauty tips and, makeup how-to videos. They talked about video games or their love for competitive chess or whatever hobbies they were into, home and garden, gun collecting. And they were really passionate about that. And they usually subscribed to really niche magazines or really niche forums on Reddit. And this big light bulb came off in our head, which was that the definition of news in America was much different than the definition of news in Japan. Japan is a monolithic country, right? It's smaller than California, one time zone. Generally, there is a difference in political opinions, definitely. But it's not as polarized as America. Most important is they don't have vast stretches of land like this. America is not one country. It is essentially 50 countries, right? Even more subdivided than that if you look at how different counties have vastly different beliefs. And so the gears started turning. First, that we would need to address these news deserts, these very remote areas. And second, how would we talk to the types of news in America that they liked, the soft news, the other things, and how could we build a balanced information diet? Of course, everybody realizes they need to hear the hard news as well, because those are very important, world and political events. But I think to balance that, to come up with a solution to help people with their stress would be things that we would work on. We did a second road trip later that year, and we wanted to see how would the media impact the elections itself. And we focused a little bit more on the East Coast. This is when the elections were in full swing, when things were really getting down to the wire. And we wanted to see what was happening in those hotly contested counties. So here we are in, I believe, North Carolina, and this was a very interesting county. In one county next door, you have an almost all-white population going to Trump rallies. And this one county over, as you can see in this photo, it's almost all Black and people of color coming to see Obama speak on behalf of Hillary. We got to meet President Obama in the back of a parking lot where, due to the overflow, he gave a second speech. And we got to see the influence of media and how it was perceived. Here's Bernie. Notice how the crowds are actually somewhat empty. This stadium was actually very empty, but on TV, it looks like a packed stadium with the zoomed in lenses. Also notice the diversity. You see Hillary, and I believe that's Pharrell in the front. And in behind them are these young people, Blacks, whites, Latinos, all together. But primarily these counties, just due to where we were practically, the vast majority were white populations. So what was very interesting, I found, was when we entered these rallies, we were not allowed to bring our own signs. They would actually hand us our own sign, and Secret Service and all of that would not let you bring things in. So the big reveal to me was when they handed young kids signs that said something like "Millennials for Bernie" or Hillary or something like that. I don't think any millennial or Gen Zer would actually write that on their own sign, right? But they'd hand you like a hand-painted sign that looked authentic, and they would kind of select, let's say, diverse-looking young people or females to come up on stage. Again, this is our cosplay for both sides. And literally the next day, you're at the opposite side. What a trip. But along the way, we would meet people like this, right? People that I would never, as a Californian, imagine ever meeting. Wow, women for Trump, Latinos for Trump. And we would interview them. We would show them our news app. We would get their opinions on the news. And really what we were after was, if we wanted to be a successful business, but moreover, if we wanted to be a public service, how could we build a news app that would help with this polarization, that could appeal to all sides, or perhaps make people more open-minded to hearing all sides? These are all very powerful moments. This, I believe, is Philadelphia. This is the night of Hillary's election. A lot of celebrities, Mama Cher in Florida, Katy Perry in New York, the mayor. Heartbreaking defeat in New York. There's actually I believe, an old Wall Street Journal reporter. You can't see his face there, but you see the little notebook on the bottom of this photo. He was doing what we were doing, but he was doing it the old school way, with a pen and paper, and interviewing people one by one to collect their stories. After the election, we went to the inauguration, and we got to see firsthand how high security was, the types of people that would attend. And we actually snuck in past security to get within, 100 feet or so of Congress and where the inauguration was occurring. So we really got to go really, really close. And again, as we were interviewing people, showing them our news app and gathering opinions. We got to see the protests right afterwards. So literally the next day, getting to interview people on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, all the angry moms. I believe it was, I don't know how many, it was hundreds of thousands of women and kids that marched in, and it was so much in DC. We couldn't even take a train. We had to walk through Georgetown or whatever, across 2 bridges to even get close. We went to New York, got to interview the neighbors at Trump Tower. And then we did our third road trip to wrap things up. We wanted to talk to swing counties, counties that switch every election. One year they vote for Clinton, one year they vote for Bush, one year they vote for Obama, one year they vote for Trump. And the question is why? And this is our founder here, interviewing a real farmer. And we talked to him about immigrant labor, what types of news he reads, his day-to-day work. We went to biker bars. We went to very rural parts of Wisconsin, I Googled this one city that we're in. Apparently they have 2 Asian people there. One of which I found playing the slot machine, interviewed her. And then there was me. So I think I like doubled or increased the diversity of this county by 50% upon my arrival. Okay, so now let's talk about what we learned and what we gained from this as a company and how this would contribute to our success. These are photos of the actual user interviews we did. We did it old school in a way, not pen and paper, but we went out through our app to find users. We also went out through Craigslist and put out ads for user research, offering Starbucks gift cards or free lunches for people to meet up with us. We went to college campuses and bars. And one of the important things is standardization and consistency. So you can't really see it in that laptop there, but we had standardized Google Forms and standardized questions so that we had some consistency in what we were asking. Because depending on our own personalities, our own political biases or UI biases, we might ask leading questions inadvertently, right? So to keep things more impartial, we tried to have standardized questions for our team. We also tried to change the way we dress, as I mentioned before, because even dressing like a Californian, even looking like you're a tech industry educated, blah, 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 immediately creates a certain impression of somebody, right? So we really tried to blend in as much as possible, but also to be humble, that we were travelers, outsiders, and you know, we're not know-it-alls. We definitely wanted and valued everybody's opinions. The woman on the upper left there is a local newspaper. I forgot where, but I believe somewhere out in Iowa or Wisconsin. Complete contrast to the LA punk rocker there on the lower right, and also in complete contrast to the Midwestern college student there in the bottom center, or the farmer, or the elderly couple up on top. Don't laugh. I'm sure you're going to find it funny for a second. These are actual user screenshots from their phones. We found often in the South and Midwest, the #1 most popular app that everybody had was the Bible, believe it or not. And another very popular app we saw was actually Pornhub. And so when you see those things, you don't giggle because you're listening to other stories, right? You're also listening to how their boss takes their phone away from them at work because they have a factory job, or how this is their first phone and they only just installed Facebook for the first time. And they've never heard of Twitter. They've never heard of Instagram. And this is like 2016, 2017. But for some of them, this is their first kind of smartphone. A lot of them at that time were running prepaid phones with limited data. We had to re-engineer our entire Smart News app because our application size was too large, and so was our caching, because a lot of users would work with very limited data plans. We also found a lot of users that didn't have phones. In New Orleans, a lot of folks in 2016 were using iPods still, the music iPods, and using the free Wi-Fi at Starbucks to surf. This is a funny highway sign I found that was called UX, and I thought it was kind of appropriate. So after 150 pages and pages of interviews, we walked away with some 4 significant changes that really impacted our future and led to our success in America. The first was we created a new algorithm just for America, which was this political slider. You see on the bottom, you can go left and right. This would allow people to explore the left and the right spectrum when it came to politics. And we were the first news app to do that. And it led to some really great success. We had a lot of TV commercials that were highly successful under this banner of news from all sides. And we refused to over personalize the news like what social media was doing, because it leads to an echo chamber. We really wanted people to see news from all sides, but we also wanted to give users the preference to hone in on the direction that they wanted to go. But the slider was a very interesting innovation that allowed the best of both worlds. Another thing we learned was the importance of color. So these are some of the Smart News colors, and let me reshare my screen here to a different tab because I want to show you something else. Oops. Here, so if I go to Google, and am I okay on time? I got another like 3 to 5 minutes or so.
You're doing great.
Thanks, man. Okay, so if you look at other news apps, this is Flipboard. All right, and let me know if you see a pattern here. This is Fox News. Okay, this is CNN. And this is Newsbreak, a very popular news app run by a Chinese competitor. Do you see any patterns? They are all political colors, right? Red and blue. Really interesting. Like Google News app, blue, right? And what does Smart News look like? White and kind of pastel rainbow. I couldn't put my finger on it. And this is a feedback we especially got from women. Time and time again, I think I'd say like half of the women we interviewed somehow, they couldn't put their finger on it. We would ask them an open-ended question like, how does the app make you feel? And they said it made people, some people said it made them feel happy or less stressed, or it made them feel smart. But when we showed them the other news apps, it made them feel stressed or fearful. And these red and blue colors, we are primed through the media or through ads, what have you. Those are political colors. And by making it, we didn't know this at the time. These were historically our colors in Japan. But these colors were more disarming and they were more diverse. And so we kind of leaned into that even more. We redesigned our icon. We used these colors more in our future ads. Before we were more focusing on the black and white aspect. You see how Smart News is in black and white, more so than our icon. So we leaned into this color diversity even more, and it attracted more and more users. This is the type of thing that you can never learn just through your own science-based typical UI UX research. This was something that or focus groups. I only got tuned into it by asking hundreds of people on the road. So back to where we were. So we also created hundreds of local channels. We realized that there's a big news desert between like small rural towns and like their next biggest city. And they often had less in common with the big city. They didn't trust the big national news. They wanted to know what was like the high school team doing in their little town. And so we created literally hundreds of small county news channels to help people there. They wanted to know the weather there. They wanted to know the crime in their local neighborhood. They wanted to know the election results, not nationally, but for their county. And these were things that other news apps were not doing. And we were among the first to really do so. And lastly, it says down there, Dream Channels. This was an internal code name, but essentially this was our project to add soft news to Smart News. Before then, we were focused on business and tech and politics, the hard news. And of course, our original audience were in Japan, salarymen, right? Middle-aged male business workers. And in America, the first users were typically skewed older, the senior demographic, news junkies. But after we made these changes, it would take years to fully optimize this new content. Our demographic has skewed more and more diverse, more and more female, and more and younger and younger every year since then, as we've diversified our content. Again, realizations we couldn't really get into our hard heads as the tech intellectuals until we heard hundreds of people tell us over and over again, I don't read the news, but I play video games and I watch beauty tips, right? That was the aha moment that took us a lot of time. We would later use these stories of the road trips to talk the talk. This is Carl Bernstein, famous Pulitzer award-winning writer. You probably remember All the President's Men, the famous movie, and the Watergate scandal. And this is Dan Rather, world famous news anchor. And they came to our future events, spoke on our behalf, but they would have only come to our events and spoken on our behalf if we had those stories, because as old school journalists, their message to other journalists, and this is at the Online News Association convention with all these young journalists from the New York Times and Washington Post there. Their main messages were, don't be lazy, do the work. And they really had a lot of remorse that in this social media age, we do not have investigative journalism. The analog for you as entrepreneurs is we lack field research. Most important, as founders and entrepreneurs, we learn empathy, right? It's not just about product market fit in terms of dollars and cents. It's about real humans and real problems. This is an actual farmer in Wisconsin who at the beginning was very, didn't know what to make of us, but by the end of our conversation, literally handed us the keys to his cabin. Again, we were complete strangers. He talked about being there for generations, about many of his neighbors going bankrupt, about how it wasn't about who they cared to vote for, it was about survival, and how they voted for Trump because they needed oil fracking. Their farms were not making any money. Without oil fracking, they couldn't send their kids to college. It was that black and white. And quite frankly, they didn't really care about most of the political details, issues that were being discussed. As we build this empathy, we have to remember that stories are primal. They're part of human nature. To develop your story, what I always tell entrepreneurs is you need to pitch your story at least 100 times. Before you talk to investors, before you make that first big client sale, pitch it to 100 people on the street. What is your app about? What is your business about, or your service that you're offering? And you have to refine that story. And you can't tell a good story unless you have that empathy about who you're talking to. Unless you really hit that nail on the head, the pitch will just be, you're just another news app, who cares? But when I give this talk to an investor or to a publishing partner or to a major national advertiser, they're moved. Part of them realizes that we're trying to do something different, and you can't fake that. I want to end on this great photo. These are actual research journals. Maybe you can guess who did what. Maybe you can't. Alan Turing, Jane Goodall, Darwin, Neil Armstrong, and of course, Carl Bernstein and Woodward. So scientists have been doing field research forever, artists as well. And my pitch to all of you is we need to do more field research as entrepreneurs and founders as well. So with that, I'd like to go back to Q&A. I'm sure there's a ton.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Vincent, for just that amazing coverage of your journey. And just it must have been an adventure. Let's just put it that way.
My official NASDAQ.
Oh, we love it. Yeah, the Yeti. Love it.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've got some questions, and if you haven't dropped your questions into the Q&A box for Vincent yet, please do so. Vincent, I'm going to start this one off with a question from Quincy. Thanks for the question. Let's see. Do you use this research for app development and using HCI, which I'm not sure what it means, but you might?
Yeah. So HCI, if you have any more detail, what you meant by HCI?
Yeah, Quincy.
Do you mean like for like human computer interaction? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Probably. That's a better guess than me. Yes, nailed it.
Okay. Yeah. So yes. So I kind of want to talk about the macro and the micro, right? The macro is what's most important. Like I said, finding your story, finding hidden stories that you didn't even know, or hidden use cases for your app or service, finding unmet needs in the market, that product market fit. Those are the most important. But the micro is also important, but it's just secondary. So along the way, I talked about colors, right? And after we had that aha moment, then in future road trips, we would specifically ask questions about the icon or about the color of our tabs on the top, right? The closer and closer you get to actual refinement of an optimization of the app layout design, those get closer to the UI, user interface side of the research. And that's better done in a larger scale with more data. So for example, using whether it's like SurveyMonkey or like Amazon Mechanical Turks or like userresearch.com, gathering a lot of people and a lot of click data is probably your best tool for that level of refinement. But the question is, what color do I start with? I don't know. That's where you start with the macro, right? The field research.
Awesome. We have a couple questions that came in around getting started. So how did you develop, or how did you and your co-founders develop the questions, the standardized set of questions that you developed to ask everyone? And what would you suggest is a good starting point for some of the people on this call?
Yeah. One of our founders, Ken Suzuki, is a PhD in like math and complex systems, and he approaches a lot of it like a scientist, and I encourage all of you to. And the short version of that is make a thesis and test that hypothesis, right? So the hypothesis we had was originally that Americans are actually, like, the user survey data we're getting is a lie. Americans are saying that they hate the news. We actually think they secretly like the news. So what else are they reading? The other hypothesis was that there was news deserts and there was an opportunity there. So we would ask questions specifically in these rural areas about their opinions and like trust in media. Do they trust national news more than local news, etc.? And we often began with research studies. So we would begin with like Pew Research or Reuters. They do like an annual like a news survey, and we would begin with that data. And then we would find loopholes in that data and be like, wait a minute, some of these areas look a little bit off or a little bit weak. Is there an opportunity for us there? So beginning with a large published study is a great way to find some simple hypotheses.
Awesome. Love that. Here's a comment/question, but somebody just came back from a cross-country road trip, and this was so engaging for me. A lot of UX research talks about persona development and identifying specific group of people for your product or service. With meeting such a diverse range of people on your trip, did your team translate all of them into a handful of personas?
Yeah. So what was really cool was these road trips with the founders would then lead to many, many future road trips with our marketing team and our product team and our engineering team. Our founders love this research so much. We made it part of our company culture, at least before COVID, right? While we could still travel. So we were sending teams to everywhere. And especially our marketing team, the first thing they did was, we got to develop personas. We got to develop personas. And they did that. And the field research, I think, was really the first step, right? The macro. Then they got the ideas for the personas. They saw these patterns. And then they would do the traditional kind of feedback groups and hire those third-party agencies to do the user research groups kind of in that kind of quantitative setting.
Awesome. Another question here for our B2B folks out there. Do you have any tips to get more field research in a B2B scenario? I always find it hard to find potential customers and get quality insights.
Yeah, this is a great one. So before Smart News, I was a director. I had a very strange title. I was director of UX strategy and marketing at Dassault Systems for a smaller division called NetVibes. And Dassault Systems is one of the largest enterprise companies in Europe, right? And NetVibes was a recent web-based startup, a personalized homepage where you could see enterprise data side by side with like social media data, right? So kind of monitor everything in one dashboard. And we were just acquired, and we had thousands of global sales reps to train in different industries, from like defense industry to aviation to I even had to go to like cosmetics industry conventions, to different markets like Asia and Japan and Europe and all over the place. So how did we do the field research? Because it was part of the business, right? The main thing we did was begin with a presentation saying that this tool could be used for like every industry and every market. And we had like mock-ups for each one of those. And then we would have senior leaders in those different markets come to us and say, hey, could you maybe fly in for a week? Could you talk to some of our customers? Like, we just want to see if maybe some of our customers want this thing. So internally, if you're at a larger enterprise for like B2B applications, going into those verticals, working with those sales teams can often be your first step into justifying your travel and your research budget, because they're making actual sales, right? Like somebody has an actual need, like they got a big client somewhere and they want you to help out. That is the most tangible. The harder one, I think, is more just the exploratory, no immediate need type of research. So, and again, this is just on my limited personal experience, but I would advise you to try to find some sort of immediate business or sales need and use that to justify your research.
Awesome. Let's see, another question on what was your analysis synthesis process, particularly for your specific field?
I would say that when you're in the field, don't overanalyze while you're in the moment, because your data set is so limited, right? Like you talk to 5 people, like usually people do, oh, I did research. I showed my app to 3 friends and this is what they said, right? Your data set is way too small and not diverse at all. So hold your opinion until you've talked to 50 plus people at least. And during like I said, the output was, we had hundreds of surveys, over 150 pages of collected notes and responses. And then we had to just sit back, tabulate all of that, analyze all of that. One of the things we also had to do was take into account a lot of the demographic data was like really important, especially like location, what they do for work, their political beliefs, finding out which demographics are important to you it's not as simple usually as like male, female, but it's more like, what about like I showed you that photo, like female, middle-aged Latino for Trump, working a factory job. It's like a very specific profile, maybe too specific, right? So data can be overwhelming and there's a lot of pitfalls. I would only say, like, don't find patterns too early. And also at the end, when you bring everything together, don't lie, right? We all have our hypotheses and we're looking for data to support or reject something. But often the biggest innovations we have are questions we haven't even asked yet. And the unfortunate part of that is that's why we did the second road trip, the third road trip, the fourth road trip. One will probably lead to another. It's a never-ending cycle. So don't think of it as a one-time thing. Basically, your first road trip, your first major research cycle will be wrong. You will have a lot of messy data, and it's only by your second or third one that you'll be able to refine the actual data that you're trying to collect too.
I think that's amazing advice. So just, you've got all of these notes, you're probably taking it on paper, but how are you storing it all to collect it, to put it together, to make actual sense of it, to be able to share with other people? How are you doing that?
Yeah, you know how a lot of people use forms to do, of course, like remote user testing? We actually built forms for the founders and myself during the actual thing. So although we're having a conversation, either I would be typing away at my laptop or in some situations, even showing a MacBook, like you're some fancy tech person, will be a barrier, right?
That's what I was
So,
thinking, yeah.
at other times, I would have like a crib notes version on a paper notepad. And then immediately after the interview, I would like rush to the car or the airport or somewhere, and I would immediately start filling in the form myself about their responses, because you could probably remember that really, really good for like 10 minutes in your head, right? Another thing I want to point out is quotables. So also, just like a journalist, don't hesitate to like quote like exact sentences or phrases, because that language they use might end up being your marketing language later, right? Like the best pitch is actually not your pitch, it's their pitch, right? So
Love it. Oh, well, Vincent, I'm sure we could spend many more hours talking about your extensive journey in user research, and extreme by that I may add, which is awesome. But thanks so much for joining us today to share more about your wisdom from all the crazy and fun and exciting user research that you did. And hopefully everyone on the call appreciates it too.
yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
All right, well, thanks again. And for everyone still on, we've got a bunch of programs coming up on the next couple months, so keep a lookout for those, and we'll follow up with the recording for this, and we look forward to welcoming you all online soon. Thanks again, Vincent.
Thank you. Bye-bye.